If you're 58 years old with less than £50,000 sitting in your pension, the standard advice to just let compound interest do the work isn't just unhelpful. It's mathematically impossible. Compound interest needs decades to build real momentum, and by 58 you simply don't have decades left before you plan to stop working. You've probably seen the chart. One person starts investing at 25, another at 45, and by 65 the early starter's pot is several times the size of the late starters, even though the late starter often put in more money each month along the way. If that chart makes you feel a bit sick, you're not imagining it. It's designed to sell long-term products to people who still have long-term left to give. Here's the part nobody shows you on that chart. A single £957 payment, made in the right place, can add £359 a year to your pension for the rest of your life. That's not a projection or a hopeful average smoothed out over 30 years. That's arithmetic the government is contractually obliged to honour. There's a second engine that only switches on once you're closer to the finish line than the start. Call it the time tax paradox. You've lost the advantage of time, but you've gained something the 25-year-old in that chart never had: structural efficiency built straight into the tax system. We're not going to talk about saving more the way a 25-year-old would. We're going to talk about something worth calling the £12,570 squeeze, and why the real win for you isn't compound interest. It's a 25% boost the government is required to hand you the moment you ask for it. Here's the number that should be the headline of your retirement plan, not a footnote. Put £80 into a pension, and the government adds £20 on top before you've earned a single penny of investment growth. That's a 25% return, handed to you the same day you make the payment. For someone with 10 years left to work, that overnight boost is worth more than a decade of hoping the stock market averages 7% a year, because you don't have a decade to sit around and wait for the market to behave itself. But here's the strange part. Most people on an ordinary income never claim it, and it isn't because the maths is unclear. I've watched people talk themselves out of this the moment they read a headline about a 60% tax trap hitting people who earn £100,000. They think, that's not me. I only earn £35,000, so none of this applies to my situation. Call it apathy paralysis, dressed up as realism. The tax relief on offer at your income isn't a rounding error. It's the single best guaranteed return available to you anywhere. You might feel like the pension ship has sailed and there's nothing left to do but watch from the shore. That feeling is real, and it's also what I'd call an identity trap. You're not behind. You're playing a different game with different rules. In your 20s, growth does the heavy lifting, because the market has time to compound and forgive your mistakes. In your 50s, a different engine takes over. Call it the efficiency engine, and it runs on tax relief and matching rather than decades of patience. Picture two paths for £10,000 with 5 years left before retirement. Leave it invested and hope for 7% growth a year, and you're looking at roughly £14,000 by the time you stop working. Or route it through a pension with basic rate tax relief and a 5% employer match, and that same £10,000 becomes £12,500 the moment it lands, before a single penny has been invested anywhere. The ONS has found that most people between 45 and 54 have less than £100,000 in pension wealth. If that's you, you're not the exception. You're the majority, and the majority still has a real path forward from here. There's a catch worth naming before we go further. If you try to chase the growth you feel you missed by piling into riskier investments in your final working years, you can walk straight into what's called the sequence of returns wall, where one bad run of markets right before you retire does damage that years of good returns afterward can't undo. That's the real trade you're weighing. Not saving more or less, but choosing certainty over a gamble you can no longer afford to lose. I used to tell everyone to max out their pension contributions first, before anything else. I was wrong, at least for anyone starting late. When time is short, A guaranteed win beats a hopeful one, and paying off debt is often the closest thing to a guaranteed win you'll ever find. Here's the maths that changed my mind. Say you have £5,000 in savings and £5,000 sitting on a credit card, charging 20% APR. Put that £5,000 into a pension, and basic rate tax relief turns it into £6,250 straight away. That looks like a win. But you're still carrying £1,000 a year in interest on that card. Within about 15 months, the interest has quietly eaten the entire tax boost you were so pleased about. Now flip it. Clear the card instead, and you've just locked in a risk-free, tax-free return of 20%, the exact rate you were being charged. No pension wrapper on earth can beat that with certainty, because a pension's growth depends on markets behaving themselves, and a cleared debt depends on nothing at all. This is the trade-off nobody puts on the chart. Every year that debt sits there at 20%, it quietly cancels out the government's generosity somewhere else in your finances. You can be doing everything right with your pension and still be losing ground, simply because the highest interest debt in the house hasn't been dealt with yet. That's the shape of the priority ladder for anyone starting later. Clear the expensive debt first, because certainty beats hope when your timeline is short. Then take every scrap of employer pension matching on offer, because turning down a match is turning down free money. After that comes a look at whether your own national insurance record deserves a payment, and finally whether a lifetime ISARE or a straightforward pension top-up suits your age and your plans better. If you're tired of being told to just save more while you're juggling a mortgage and rising bills, you're in the right place. This channel deals with the maths of retirement as it actually works for people our age, not the version written for someone starting at 22. Once the debt is gone and the emergency cash is sorted, we get to the part of the system most people your age have never been told about properly. It starts with a letter from the DWP, and it might be the best value payment you ever make. The state pension age is rising from 66 to 67 right now, phased in between the 6th of April 2026 and April 2028. Whatever bridge you were planning between stopping work and your state pension arriving, it just got a little longer, and that makes the mechanism in this section worth far more to you than it would have been 5 years ago. Here's the number that should be tattooed on the inside of every pension statement. A full new state pension for the 2026 to 2027 tax year pays £241.30 a week, close to £12,547 a year. To buy that kind of guaranteed, inflation-linked income for life on the open annuity market, you'd typically need a pension pot of somewhere around £250,000. The state pension gives it to you without you ever having built that pot yourself, as long as your national insurance record is complete. That's the part most people never check. If you've got gaps in your national insurance record, usually from years spent raising children, caring for a relative, or simply working somewhere that didn't pay in, you can fill them with a voluntary Class 3 contribution. At 2026 to 2027 rates, one qualifying year costs roughly £957 or £18 and 40 pence a week if you'd rather spread it out. That single £957 payment adds about £359 a year to your state pension, and it's inflation-linked for as long as you live. Live another 20 years in retirement, which is a realistic expectation for someone in their late 50s or 60s today, and that £957 comes back to you as roughly £7,180. You've turned less than £1,000 into a lifetime income stream worth more than 7 times what you paid for it. No ISA, no SIPP, and no stock market index can promise you that with a straight face. This isn't a rare situation either. Most people who took time out to raise children, spent a stretch caring for a parent, or worked cash in hand somewhere years ago have at least one incomplete year sitting quietly on their record without realizing it. Filling a few of those gaps rather than just one multiplies the same return again. 4 gaps at £957 each, add up to roughly £3,828 and could add around £1,436 a year to your pension for the rest of your life, every single year you're drawing it. Since the 2008 financial crisis, interest rates have swung around in ways nobody fully predicted, but the triple lock has kept doing its job regardless. This year's 4.8% increase means the state pension has quietly become the steadiest asset most people in their 50s and 60s actually own. There's a catch waiting just around the corner, though. That £12,547 a year sits only £23 below your personal income tax allowance of £12,570. Earn £1 more from anywhere else, a small pension, part-time work, rental income, and the taxman is straight there to take his share. Picture two versions of your future, 5 or 10 years from now. In one, you're relying almost entirely on the state pension plus whatever sits in your SIPP. Because the personal allowance has been frozen at £12,570, almost every extra pound that pension pays you gets taxed at 20% the moment it lands. Call that the fragile path. Your income looks fine on paper, but the taxman is quietly first in line for a slice of nearly everything you draw. There's a more resilient version, and it comes down to splitting where your money sits. A SIPP gives you tax relief going in, and then gets taxed on the way out, which is exactly the squeeze we just described. A lifetime ISA works the other way round. You get no tax relief on what you pay in because it's already taxed money, but the government still adds a 25% bonus on top, and everything you take out later is completely tax-free. Which one suits you better depends on what your tax position looks like once you're actually drawing the money, not just on which one hands you the bigger bonus today. I should be straight with you here. The lifetime ISA only accepts new money if you're under 50, and you had to have opened one before turning 40 in the first place. For a lot of people watching this in their late 50s or early 60s, that window has already closed, and that's simply the reality of the rules, not a mistake you made. I remember a neighbour of mine, 54 at the time, who was completely fixed on his SIPP. He kept pushing every spare pound into it for the tax relief, without realising he was quietly building himself a bigger tax bill for later in life. A chunk of that same money moved through a stocks and shares ISA instead once his SIPP contributions were sensible, would have grown just as well and come out at the other end without HMRC taking another bite. If you're over 50 and the lifetime ISA window has already shut for you, there's still a route worth knowing about. HMRC lets you carry forward unused pension annual allowance from the previous 3 tax years, which means a single well-timed contribution can be considerably larger than the standard yearly limit allows. It's not as generous as the lifetime ISA bonus, but it's a real way to catch up in one go, rather than a little at a time. Here's a scenario worth running through before it happens to you rather than after. Say you're 53 now, and the plan has always been simple. Stop full-time work and start drawing your private pension at 55, sometime in 2028. Except the normal minimum pension age rises from 55 to 57 on the 6th of April 2028. If your 55th birthday lands after that date, the pension you were counting on stays locked for another 2 years, not the early start you'd penciled in. Somebody who hasn't planned around that date stops work anyway, expecting the pension to fill the gap, and finds it isn't available. They either burn through whatever emergency cash they have far faster than expected, or reach for high-interest borrowing to cover the shortfall, which undoes a good chunk of the tax efficiency they worked so hard to build. Somebody who has planned around it does something simpler. They keep around 2 years of living expenses sitting in a cash ISA, deliberately used as a bridge between the day they stop working and the day their pension actually opens up. That's worth doing sooner rather than later too, because the £20,000 ISA allowance available to savers under 65 drops to £12,000 from the 6th of April, 2027. It helps to know the size of the gap you're actually bridging. The Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association puts the moderate retirement target for a couple at around £43,900 a year. Even with 2 full state pensions coming in, that's roughly £25,094 combined, leaving a gap of close to £18,800 a year that has to come from savings, pensions, or both. So why do so many people wait until the last minute to plan around dates like these, when the numbers are sitting right there in black and white? It isn't because we're careless with money. There's a specific psychological reason we look away from exactly the thing we should be looking at hardest. And it has a name. There's a name for what happens in your head the moment you realize you've missed the train. It's called the ostrich effect. And when we feel like we're behind, our brain doesn't push us to check the numbers. It pushes us to avoid them entirely, because looking feels worse than not knowing. That avoidance feels protective in the moment, even though it quietly costs far more over the years than just facing the number ever would. It is completely normal to feel a flicker of shame when you see someone in their 30s with £200,000 already sitting in a pension. But their maths isn't your maths. They're playing a game built around growth and time. You're playing a different game built around certainty and structure, and it rewards a different kind of move. So stop looking at the total pot you think you should have by now. That number is designed to make anyone feel behind. Look instead at the weekly top-up. Can you find £20 a week to turn into £25 through tax relief? That's roughly the cost of one weekly supermarket top-up shop, the kind you barely think twice about, in exchange for a guaranteed pay rise for the version of you who's 70 and glad somebody bothered. You're not late. You're starting the second half of a game where every point you score is worth double what it was worth in your 20s. That's not a consolation prize. That's just how the rules work once you know them. 3 things are worth doing, in this order. Clear any debt charging you 20% or more, because that's a guaranteed return no pension can match. Check your national insurance record for gaps, because a single year filled can return more than 7 times what you paid for it. Then use whatever combination of pension and ISA tax boosts fits your age to bridge the years between stopping work and your state pension arriving at 67. That chart with Investor A and Investor B was never really about you. It's a ghost story built for people with 40 years ahead of them, not people with 15 behind and 15 still to plan for. Your reality runs on structural efficiency, on making the tax system do the heavy lifting that time no longer can. If you want to work out exactly how close you already are, subscribe and have a look at the next video for the steps to calculate it properly. You've got this.